The wind that night didn't howl. It hunted. It crawled over the frozen ridges, slipped through pine branches, and searched for weakness the way winter always does. The temperature had already fallen past -20 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to turn breath into needles and silence into danger. Yet in the middle of that white emptiness stood a low house pressed into the earth, almost invisible, as if the mountain itself had decided to grow a shelter. Inside, it was warm, not by miracle, not by luck, but by the hands of a quiet 58-year-old veteran who had come here to escape ghosts, not become someone else's hope. Beside the door lay his German shepherd, eyes steady, ears tuned to a world humans no longer heard clearly. Before dawn, a sound would rise from the storm, the kind that separates survival from regret. And the fire at the heart of that house would prove that sometimes the strongest walls are built by those who once believed they had nothing left to protect. Late winter afternoon, pale sun fading behind wind-shaved ridges. The northern high plains of Wyoming lay buried under hard snow, air dry and sharp as ground glass, wind whispering through black pines, distant lakes sealed in dull gray ice. The world emptied of engines, sirens, and memory, except what a man carried inside his ribs. Alden Virek was 58 years old, tall in a way that came from long years of marching rather than good posture. Shoulders still square, but slightly bowed by invisible weight. His face was angular, clean-shaven, the lines beside his mouth etched deep as if carved by cold wind. His nose slightly crooked from an old break. His eyes a washed-out steel blue that rarely rested in one place for long. His hair, once dark, had faded to a dry ash brown threaded heavily with gray, cut short out of habit. He moved with the economical precision of someone who had learned that wasted motion cost heat, energy, sometimes blood. He did not speak unless there was a reason, and even alone he conserved words the way others conserved food. Years earlier, in a place of dust and shattered walls, a decision made in seconds had cost lives he still counted in dreams. Since then, sudden noise made his jaw tighten before his mind caught up. Behind him padded Torin, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick black saddle and deep amber tan along his legs and chest, fur dense from the northern cold. The dog's build was powerful but not bulky, long-muscled, bred for endurance. His ears stood erect and alert, but his eyes held a calm, assessing steadiness that matched Alden's own scanning gaze. Torin rarely barked. He watched, listened, then acted. A pale scar traced one foreleg where wire had once bitten deep, an old rescue, an old lesson. With Alden, he moved not like a pet, but like a partner who understood space, silence, and duty. They stopped where a natural rock outcrop hunched from the slope like the shoulder of some buried giant. Alden stood still for a full minute, feeling the wind on his cheeks, watching how loose snow drifted. "Leeward side," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. He walked the perimeter in a slow arc, boots crunching through crusted layers, confirming what instinct already told him. The stone would break the prevailing north wind, and the slight depression behind it would keep ground-level gusts from cutting straight through camp. He unshouldered his pack and began work without ceremony. First came the entrenching tool, compact, military surplus, edges worn smooth by time. He drove it into the snow and frozen soil, chipping, prying, until a shallow rectangle formed, roughly 2 meters long, 40 centimeters deep. The effort made steam rise from his collar, but he paced himself, breathing through his nose, pausing before sweat could soak his base layer. Sweat killed faster than cold. Tom circled once, then settled nearby, head up, watching the tree line. Alden lined the pit with gathered pine boughs, selecting branches heavy with needles, snapping them clean. The green layer built up thick and springy, trapping pockets of air. "Air's the insulation," he muttered, more to keep the thought anchored than to explain. He spread a folded military tarp above, anchoring its edges with snow blocks cut hard and square. The tarp angled low toward the rock face, creating a sloped roof that would shed spindrift. He left a small vent gap downwind, careful not to seal himself into his own breath. Inside the shelter, the space felt immediately different, still, muted, as if the wind had been turned into a distant rumor. Alden crawled in, adjusted the boughs with gloved hands, then lay still for a moment, eyes on the tarp ceiling. The faint resin scent of pine filled his lungs, sharp and clean. For a few seconds he expected the old sound, rotor blades, shouted commands, but there was only the quiet weight of snow. His chest loosened by a fraction. He crawled back out before dusk. From a small sack he took a metal cup, scooped clean snow, and set it in a shallow pit shielded by stones. A compact stove hissed to life, blue flame tight and controlled. Melt first, then heat, never scorch the cup dry. Torrin approached, tail low but relaxed, and Alden poured some lukewarm water into a collapsible bowl, watching the dog drink in slow, steady laps. "Small sips," he said softly, habit transferring from men to dog without pause. As light drained from the sky, temperature fell fast. Alden layered deliberately, moisture-wicking base, wool midlayer, wind shell. He loosened his boots, but did not remove them. Frozen leather in morning was a liability. He ate without appetite, dense rations chewed methodically. Hunger was information, not emotion. Yet as he watched the first stars prick through the darkening blue, a different ache surfaced. The absence of noise that did not threaten. In town, engines and voices had pressed against him like walls. Here the silence opened wide, and in that openness, memories moved more freely. He let them come in measured doses, naming them, then setting them down. A technique learned too late, but held close now. Torrin circled twice inside the shelter and lay against Alden's calves, a warm, living weight. Alden rested one gloved hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the steady respiration, the quiet thump of a tail once, twice, before stillness. Outside, wind combed the pines. Snow crystals hissed across the tarp like sand. The thermometer clipped to his pack strap read -18 degrees Celsius and dropping. He listened to his own breath, counting without meaning to, matching the rhythm to Torrin's. Cold crept, but did not bite. The pine boughs beneath trapped heat. The rock behind blocked the worst gusts. The low profile kept convection from stealing what little warmth they made. Alden shifted once, adjusting a corner where air slipped through, packing a bit more snow along the edge. Small corrections prevented big problems. He had learned that long ago, under different skies. Sleep came in shallow waves. He woke once to the distant crack of ice shifting on the lake, heart racing before mind caught up. He pressed his palm to Torrin's ribs, grounding himself in the rise and fall. "We're here," he whispered, not a reassurance to the dog, but to the man who still sometimes stood in other winters. When the night reached its coldest depth, stars burned hard and white above the ridge. Inside the shelter, breath fogged, but did not frost. Alden did not shiver. Torin, curled tight, gave a soft huff in his sleep. The world outside remained vast and indifferent, but within the small hollow of rock, tarp, and pine, a pocket of human will held its ground against the dark. Morning came thin and colorless over the snowfields, light sliding low across the ridges, while the air hung still before the day's wind gathered strength. Alden Virik rose from the shallow shelter behind the rock outcrop with the slow efficiency of a man who measured the world in calories and daylight. Frost clung to the edges of his short, gray-threaded hair, and his steel-blue eyes scanned the slope automatically, mapping terrain the way others read newspapers. Torin stood already, black and tan coat dusted white, ears pricked toward the open valley, breath rolling in pale clouds. Alden rested a hand briefly on the dog's thick neck, grounding both of them in the present, then shouldered his pack and walked the perimeter he had chosen the night before, marking the outline of something more permanent in the snow with the heel of his boot. This would not be a tent, not a shelter meant to be abandoned at dawn. This would be a structure that resisted wind not by force, but by design. He began by cutting shallow trenches along the rectangle's sides, widening yesterday's depression and pushing soil and snow outward to form low berms. Each movement followed a memory drilled into muscle. Reduce exposure, reduce angles the wind can catch, sink your profile into the land. Torin moved in widening circles, occasionally nosing loose sticks toward Alden, tail swaying once he understood the rhythm of the work. The dog's amber eyes stayed soft but alert, a quiet sentinel who had learned long ago that stillness was a kind of strength. By midday, Alden had hauled the first lengths of deadfall from the tree line, straight pine trunks bleached by seasons, light enough to drag, yet solid at the core. He stacked them in pairs, forming the inner wall of what would become a semi-buried wooden house. His face remained expressionless, but a tightness lived in the corners of his mouth, the old reflex of concentration under pressure. He set each log carefully, shaving contact points with a hatchet, so they nested tight, reducing gaps where air could steal warmth. Between the inner and outer rows, he prepared the insulating mix. Dried moss he scraped from rock faces, gray clay dug from beneath the frozen top layer, and a scoop of fine charcoal dust from last night's small fire. He blended it with gloved hands until it formed a damp, fibrous mass. "Trap the air, slow the heat," he murmured, voice nearly lost in the hush. He pressed the mixture into the cavity between the walls, tamping it firm. The scent of earth rose sharp and ancient, grounding him more effectively than any spoken reassurance. Torin dragged a thinner branch across the snow and dropped it beside him, ears tilted as if awaiting orders. Alden gave a brief nod. "Good, partner." Praise came rarely, but when it did, it was precise. Clouds gathered in the west, low and metallic, promising wind by late afternoon. Alden shifted pace, constructing the roof frame with a deliberate slope barely above horizontal, the angle calculated so gusts would slide over instead of lifting. He used forked branches as braces, binding joints with paracord salvaged from old gear. The structure's profile stayed low, hugging the bermed earth. As he worked, he sensed, rather than heard, a change in Torin's posture. The dog had gone rigid, head turned downslope. Alden followed the line of sight and saw movement between trees, a figure emerging slowly, not charging, not hiding. He set the hatchet down within reach and stood upright. The stranger raised empty hands. The man was perhaps mid-40s, tall but lean to the point of stringiness, with a narrow, wind-burned face and a beard grown uneven, as if trimmed with a dull blade. His dark hair, longer than regulation but tied back, whipped in the rising breeze. His eyes were a deep brown, watchful and cautious, without hostility. A faded scar crossed one eyebrow, pulling it slightly upward, lending his expression a permanent note of questioning. He wore mismatched winter layers, an old hunting jacket, patched at the elbows, and insulated pants tucked into worn boots. "Name's Corin Hale," he called, voice hoarse but steady. "Didn't mean to sneak up. I track elk through here sometimes. Saw smoke earlier." His stance stayed open, weight balanced for retreat rather than aggression. Alden assessed in seconds. Gait uninjured, hands rough with work, not trembling. A man used to cold, but not eager for conflict. "Alden," he replied simply, not offering more. Torin's ears remained forward, tail low but not tucked, evaluating scent and tone. Corin stepped closer, only after Alden gave a small nod. Up close, lines etched Corin's face deeply, the look of someone who had spent more seasons outside than under roofs. His voice carried a hint of dry humor that surfaced even through caution. "Wind'll be rough tonight," he said, eyeing the low roof frame. "That slope'll help." Alden gave a single grunt of acknowledgement. They worked side by side without further exchange, Corin handing up branches, Alden securing them. An unspoken truce formed, not from trust, but from shared understanding of physics and weather. Together they packed snow along the outer walls, stomping it firm so it froze into a wind-proof shell. Alden shoveled a thin layer of soil over the roof, then more snow, creating a composite skin that blended structure and landscape. By late afternoon, the wind arrived as a steady push, combing the slope and testing every edge. Inside the partial structure, air remained still. Alden crouched at the doorway's future position, marking the southern orientation with a stick. Even weak winter sun, he knew, carried energy. Angled right, it could warm the interior during clear hours. Corin watched with quiet interest. "You military?" he asked finally. Alden's jaw tightened briefly. "Was." The single syllable held a closed door. Corin nodded, not prying. He had the look of a man who understood unanswered questions. As dusk bled across the sky, Corin stepped back. "I camp East Ridge," he said. "If wind shifts bad, I'll know where to head." Alden inclined his head once, an acknowledgement rather than invitation. Torin gave a low chuff, memorizing scent and cadence. Corin vanished between pines as the first real gust struck, sending plumes of snow streaming sideways. Alden crawled into the half-finished structure, noting how the wind skimmed over rather than slammed into it. He pressed his palm to the inner wall. The insulating mix already dulled the cold's bite. Outside, the world sharpened into noise, but within the low timber shell, a pocket of resistance had begun. The storm arrived before dawn, not with drama, but with pressure, the kind that bent tree crowns eastward and packed the sky into a single moving wall of white. Alden Virek woke to the sound first, the low, sustained roar of wind forcing itself across the ridge like a freight train that never passed. Snow filtered through the air in horizontal sheets, striking the outer, snow-packed shell of the house with a dry hiss. Inside the low wooden structure, dim blue morning light seeped through the southern doorway opening, now covered by a weighted flap. Alden lay still for a moment, listening, eyes open and steady, the angular lines of his face lit faintly. Beside his legs, Torin lifted his head, ears rigid, amber eyes fixed on the trembling roofline. The dog's body stayed calm, breath slow, trusting the space because Alden trusted it. Alden pushed himself up without haste. He moved like a man long accustomed to beginning difficult days before the sun did. His gloved hand brushed the inner wall, feeling for cold bleed. The insulation held firm, the packed moss-clay char mix already proving its worth. He set about building what he knew would decide the night's outcome, the thermal core. Outside, the thermometer clipped near the doorway read -22 degrees Celsius and falling. Inside, the air hovered just above freezing, still survivable, but not yet secure. He gathered flat stones he had cached the day before, dense, river-worn slabs he had hauled from a half-buried stream bed, chosen for mass rather than beauty. He arranged them in a tight ring, creating the firebox base on a patch of hard-packed earth he had tamped smooth with the back of his shovel. The soil beneath, he knew, would act as a slow battery, absorbing heat and releasing it hours later. He layered stones upward into a low dome, leaving an opening for wood and an angled channel for smoke. That channel did not run straight. Instead, Alden bent it in a shallow S-curve using smaller stones, forcing hot gases to travel longer within the structure before escaping. The technique had no name in his memory, only the result, warmth that lingered after flame died. Torin shifted closer, watching each movement, nose twitching at the mineral scent of stone. As Alden worked, a sudden metallic clatter rang from outside, sharp, unnatural, cut off too quickly to be falling debris. Torin sprang upright, muscles taut, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Alden froze, head tilted, isolating the direction through the wind's chaos. Another sound followed, a brief human cough, swallowed by gusts. Alden moved to the doorway, lifting the weighted flap just enough to peer out. Snow lashed his face, but through the blur he saw a shape downwind near the tree line. A dark form hunched low. He grabbed a coil of rope and stepped into the storm. The figure was a woman, half kneeling, half fallen against a drifted stump. She looked to be in her early 30s, tall but gaunt with exhaustion. Her skin was pale under windburn, freckles faint across a narrow nose. Long auburn hair, braided but loosened by weather, had iced into stiff strands along her hood. Her eyes, gray-green, sharp even through fatigue, met Alden's with stubborn focus rather than panic. Her face was narrow, cheekbones pronounced, lips cracked but pressed tight as if she had practiced silence. A small dent marred the side of her helmet, and a metal snowshoe lay twisted nearby, its binding snapped. She wore layered backcountry gear, quality but worn, the knees patched with careful stitches. "I misjudged the ridge," she said through chattering teeth, voice low and controlled. "Name's Mira Solon. Even in distress, her tone carried dry resolve. Alden did not waste breath on questions. He secured the rope around her torso and guided her back, step by step, Torrin circling them like a moving wall against the wind. Inside, Alden stripped the outer, ice-crusted layer from her jacket, working efficiently but without roughness. Mira did not flinch, jaw clenched more against loss of control than cold. Alden wrapped her in a spare wool blanket and sat her near, but not against the firebox sight. "Slow warm," he said. "No shock." She nodded once, understanding. Her hands, long-fingered and calloused, betrayed someone accustomed to climbing or tools rather than domestic work. A faint scar cut across one knuckle, healed poorly, a sign of old fracture ignored. Alden fed the first load of seasoned hardwood into the stone chamber, oak lengths he had split and dried months before coming north, carried at cost because he knew green wood lied. Flame caught low, then deepened. The stones began to darken, moisture hissing away. Smoke slid along the curved channel, slowing, surrendering heat before slipping out through the vent Alden had left in the roof seam. Torrin settled again, ears pivoting each time the wind slammed, but eyes returning to Mira, assessing her breathing. She watched the stones, understanding dawning as warmth radiated outward in a gentle wave rather than a blast. "Thermal mass," she murmured, half to herself. "You're storing the sun you don't have." Alden's mouth twitched at one corner. "Something like that." Minutes stretched. Mira's shivering lessened, replaced by small, controlled tremors. She flexed her fingers slowly, regaining sensation. Her gaze drifted to Torrin. "Good dog," she said softly. Torrin's tail thumped once, deliberate. Outside, the storm howled on. But within the low structure the air changed character, less brittle, more forgiving. Alden checked a metal cup of water near the wall. The surface rippled, but did not freeze. He added another log, then sealed the firebox opening with a fitted stone, allowing the stored heat to work. The floor beneath warmed gradually, releasing a subtle, even comfort through boots and bones alike. Mira leaned back, eyes closing briefly. "I map avalanche lines," she said after a while, voice steadier. "Tried to outrun the front. Bad call." There was no self-pity in it, only analysis. Alden nodded. Decisions had weight. Some stayed longer than snow. They sat in shared quiet, three beings in a pocket of survivable air carved from a hostile morning. Hours passed, measured not by clock, but by the rhythm of feeding the stone heart and listening to the wind tire itself. When darkness came early, the house held its warmth like a memory that refused to fade. Outside remained lethal. Inside, breath no longer smoked thick. Mira watched the stones glow faintly under ash, eyes reflecting firelight. Alden sat opposite, steel-blue gaze steady, the lines of his face softer in the heat. Torrin lay between them, a living bridge. In the storm's long roar, the lesson moved unseen. Strength did not always shout. Sometimes it curved like smoke, staying longer because it did not rush to leave. The storm did not weaken. It deepened, layering wind upon wind until the world outside became a moving wall of white noise. Snow no longer fell from above, but traveled sideways, a river in the air. Inside the low wooden house pressed into the slope, warmth from the stone fire core radiated steadily, the floor releasing stored heat in a quiet pulse. Alden Virek sat near the hearth, angular face shadowed by firelight, steel blue eyes half-lidded yet alert. Torin lay stretched across the doorway's inner threshold, ears twitching to every shift in sound beyond the wind's constant roar. Mira Solon rested against the wall opposite, wrapped in wool, auburn braid now dry and coiled over one shoulder, her gray-green gaze thoughtful rather than frightened. Color had returned to her cheeks, but fatigue still shaped the line of her jaw. Then Torin lifted his head sharply, nostrils flaring, body going from rest to readiness in a single breath. A low whine vibrated in his throat, not alarm, but urgency. He stood, circled once, and pawed at the door flap, eyes fixed on Alden. Alden did not question. He pulled on his outer shell, secured a line around his waist, and nodded to Mira. "Watch the fire. Keep stones covered." She gave a tight nod, already pushing herself up, despite lingering weakness. Outside, the storm erased distance. Torin led, nose low, moving with purpose through knee-deep drift, Alden following the taut line. 50 meters downslope, the dog stopped beside a dark shape half buried near a wind-bent pine. A man lay on his side, one arm crooked beneath him. Alden rolled him gently onto his back. The stranger was perhaps early 50s, broad-shouldered but gone lean with age, his beard thick and iron-gray, rimed with frost. His face was deeply lined, the skin weathered and cracked along the cheeks. A scar ran from ear to jaw, old and pale. His eyelids fluttered but did not open fully. Clothes told a story. Heavy canvas coat soaked through, wool beneath stiff with ice, gloves missing. A hunting rifle lay several feet away, partly drifted over. Alden checked breathing, shallow, irregular, then pulse at the neck, slow but present. "Hypothermia," he muttered. Torin hovered close, tail low, as if guarding life itself. Alden worked quickly but without haste, cutting the outer coat free where it had frozen to itself, stripping wet layers, replacing them with his spare insulating wrap. He avoided direct heat, remembering the danger of sudden rewarming shock. He slung the man across his shoulders with practiced care and followed Torin back, step by deliberate step against the storm's push. Inside, Mira cleared space, near but not against the hearth. She moved with focused efficiency now, eyes bright with purpose. Alden laid the man on layered blankets, positioning him on his back, head slightly elevated. His lips were pale, breath faint. Alden removed remaining damp clothing, replacing it with dry layers from his own reserve, then wrapped him in wool and an emergency bivvy to trap heat. He positioned the man at the edge of the thermal zone, not in the fire's direct path, but within the steady envelope of warmth radiating from stone and floor. "No sudden heat," he said. Mira nodded. She warmed water slowly and brought the cup. Alden lifted the man's head just enough. "Sip," he instructed. The man swallowed weakly, throat working with effort. After long minutes, his eyes opened, muddy brown, unfocused at first, then sharpening with awareness and confusion. "Where?" His voice rasped like dry bark. "Shelter," Mira said gently. "You're safe." He blinked at her, then at Alden, then at Torin, who watched from a careful distance. "Name's Rorik Dane," he whispered after a while. His voice carried the low gravel of someone who had shouted over wind for years. "Been hunting these ridges since I was a boy."
Didn't hear the front coming.
Shame flickered across his face, quickly masked. The scar along his jaw tugged as he tried to sit. Alden pressed him back. "Rest. Talking costs heat." Rurik obeyed, though his eyes remained open, studying the structure with quiet astonishment. The low roof, the packed snow walls, the glowing stone heart. "Smart build," he murmured. "Never seen it done that way." Mira smiled faintly. "He bends the rules of cold." Alden said nothing, feeding another split of hardwood into the chamber, sealing the opening again. The stones glowed deeper, radiating a slow, patient warmth that filled the room like an invisible tide. Hours passed. Outside, the storm clawed and roared, but inside, the air stayed survivable. Rurik's color returned gradually, shivering, giving way to controlled tremors, then stillness. Alden checked his pulse periodically, watched breathing, measured time not by clock, but by change. Mira prepared thin broth from her pack, adding salt. Rurik sipped, strength returning in increments. Torin eventually lay near his feet, a quiet guardian. In the long night, words came in fragments. Rurik spoke of a younger brother lost to a winter river years ago, the memory shaping his stubbornness, his refusal to retreat from storms. Mira listened, eyes reflecting firelight, recognizing a familiar pattern of guilt worn like armor. Alden's gaze remained steady, the lines of his face unreadable, but something softened in the set of his shoulders. 3 lives, shaped by different winters, held in the same fragile bubble of heat. Near dawn, the wind's pitch lowered, less a scream than a weary moan. Alden stepped outside briefly. Snow lay piled high, but the sky showed a pale thinning. He returned, brushing ice from his sleeves. Inside, Rurik slept, breathing deep and even. Mira dozed upright, chin tucked. Torin lifted his head once, met Alden's eyes, then rested again. The small house, half earth and half intention, had become more than shelter. It had become a boundary against the indifferent dark. And in that boundary, something unspoken grew. The knowledge that survival shared was a kind of quiet redemption. Winter did not end. It simply loosened its grip. Snow still lay deep across the northern high plains, but sunlight lingered a little longer each day, glancing off drifts in pale gold rather than iron gray. The wind no longer screamed. It moved in long, tired breaths, and the sky, though still cold, sometimes showed strips of blue between cloud banks. Alden Virik stood outside the low, earth-shouldered house at the base of the slope, his tall frame still spare but steadier now, shoulders squared under a weathered shell jacket. His angular, clean-shaven face had not softened, yet the steel blue of his eyes carried less strain, as if the land had accepted him as part of its pattern, rather than an intruder. Torin lay near the doorway, thick black and tan coat shedding clumps of winter fur, amber eyes calm, tail thumping once at the sound of approaching footsteps. They came in ones and twos at first, drawn by stories carried between scattered cabins and hunting trails. A house that did not freeze, a stone heart that held warmth through the longest night. A man who asked for nothing in return. The first to arrive that morning was a woman in her late 40s named Lisa Corvin. She was short and broad-shouldered, with wind-reddened skin and dark hair streaked early with silver, braided tightly at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were a clear hazel, sharp with practical intelligence. A long-heeled burn scar climbed one forearm, skin puckered and pale, a reminder of a cabin fire years ago that had taken her husband and reshaped her caution into near-stubborn vigilance. She walked with deliberate steps, boots repaired with careful stitching, and carried a notebook tucked inside her coat. "I don't want pity," she said by way of greeting. "I want to learn why your walls don't breathe cold." Alden nodded once, accepting both her tone and her purpose. Behind her came a younger man, perhaps 30, narrow-hipped and long-limbed, with sunken cheeks and a beard too thin to hide the gauntness beneath. His name was Halen Voss. His pale eyes shifted often, not from distrust, but from the habit of someone who had spent months watching horizons for signs of weather. A frostbite scar traced the edge of his left ear, giving it a blunted tip. He had once worked road crews, he explained in a low voice, until winter closures left him stranded in a trailer too thin for real cold. Fear had taught him faster than books. Alden did not make speeches. He walked them around the structure, gloved hand tapping the double wall. Inner log, outer log. Gap stays dry. He scraped a bit of the moss-clay char mixture from a seam and placed it in Lisa's palm. "Air trapped here. Stops flow." She nodded, scribbling notes. Halen crouched to touch the snow-packed berm, eyes widening as he realized it was solid as stone. "You turned snow into a wall," he murmured. Alden's mouth twitched faintly. "Snow's just air wearing a coat." More came as days passed. A widower named Tarek Ilmon, tall and stooped, with deep-set brown eyes and hands permanently stained by tannins from working hides. A quiet teenage girl, Sarah Malkin, thin as a sapling, freckles scattered across her nose, who listened more than she spoke, but memorized every motion. An older couple, Merrick and Aylin, who moved in mirrored gestures, finishing each other's sentences as if speech itself were shared property. None arrived by accident. Each had faced winter alone and found it larger than pride. Alden showed them step by step, selecting logs that nested tight, shaving contact points, packing insulation without gaps, keeping the roofline low so wind slipped past. He demonstrated the stone fire core, placing slabs with the care of a mason, though he had never claimed that title. "Heat moves slow through mass," he said, voice even. "You make it travel far before it leaves." He explained the curved smoke path, how straight lines wasted warmth. Mira, recovered and steady, added notes from her mapping experience, sketching airflow patterns in the snow with a stick. Rurik, beard now trimmed, stood by the woodpile, splitting seasoned hardwood and passing pieces forward without speaking, his scarred jaw set in quiet concentration. Corin appeared one afternoon as if he had never left, offering extra cordage and a nod of approval at the growing ring of learners. Torin remained near the doorway, tail sweeping once for each new scent accepted, amber eyes following hands rather than faces, as if judging intent through movement. Children from distant cabins sometimes reached to touch his thick fur. He stood still, patient, ears relaxed. In that posture was a message Alden did not voice. Strength did not always require teeth. One evening, as a pale dusk settled, and the learners prepared to return to their scattered homes, Lisa paused by the fire core. "You don't ask anything," she said quietly. Alden looked at the stones glowing under ash. "Heat spreads on its own," he replied. "No reason walls should stop that." She studied him a moment, seeing perhaps the lines of old battles in his stillness, and nodded. They left in small groups, carrying new knowledge the way others carried tools. The valley did not change overnight. Storms still came, snow still fell. But light glimmered longer in distant windows now, and smoke from low chimneys rose in steadier columns, less frantic, more certain. Alden watched from the doorway, hands tucked under his arms for warmth. Torrin leaned against his leg, solid and alive. Snowflakes drifted down, slower, softer, catching the last light. The world remained cold, but not empty. In the shared warmth of stone and skill, a different kind of fire had begun, one that traveled without flame, crossing distance the way breath crossed the air between people who had once stood alone. Warmth is never only about fire, walls, or survival skills. Real warmth is built when knowledge is shared, when strength protects instead of harms, and when people who once stood alone choose to stand for one another. The cold outside never truly disappears, but inside a human heart that refuses to close, winter loses its power. In everyday life, storms come in different forms: loss, loneliness, failure, fear. We cannot always stop the storm, but we can learn how to build our inner shelter: patience, wisdom, compassion, and the courage to help someone else stand back up. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply open the door. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a little warmth today. Leave a comment about where you're watching from, or a lesson life has taught you through your own winter. And subscribe to the channel so we can keep building more stories of strength, hope, and quiet courage together. May God watch over you, protect your home, and bring light to your coldest days.